And today we unveil another game based on the Quake 2 engine.
Kimberly, come in. Are you okay?
You got the power.
You're now listening to Retro Gaming Radio.
Well, folks, welcome to the final edition of Retro Gaming Radio. A lot of folks out there may have some conjectures as to why Retro Gaming Radio is finally closing its doors after nearly 2 years of being on the internet, being on the web. And I'd like to take a minute to address that. There has been a lot of speculation in the classic gaming circles, on the RetroCade mailing list, amongst other places, as to what happened to classic gaming. And classic gaming is still around in one form or another. But a lot of the reason that a lot of us got into it to begin with, the emulation of classic video games, most of those people have moved on. The guys from Atmospheric Heights and even Vintage Gaming and a lot of the other places that featured more classic gaming are moving along into the next generation emulation, like Nintendo 64 and PlayStation. And while that's got a place, it's not really where Retro Gaming Radio was ever intended to be. We've had 2 glorious years of retro reliving with the classic arcade games that have come to pass through MAME and RetroCade and the other emulators. But now, it's really not really much retro anymore. We're emulating systems that are still on the market, that people still have in their house. It's plentifully available at yard sales or even out of the paper. You know, people are dumping PlayStations left and right. And the scene's just kind of withered away. You know, it hasn't really died, but even the people who were diehard into emulation are sort of phasing out of it. You know, Ron over at Snipercade doesn't want to do MAME scores anymore, and I can't blame him. It's taking up a lot of time from him and his family, so he wants to pass that along. There's a lot of things that I've had to do over this last year or so. You've noticed that Monroe World has slendered out quite a bit. It's become a portal, and I now run the Amiga Emulation Zone, which to me is fairly low maintenance. I get to put up a handful of games every week or two, and it doesn't cut into much of my time. And most of you know I'm back into video game programming, which is something that I've said many times on this show I'd like to get back into and to bring the classics up to today. Well, that's not really what Retro Gaming Radio is about. And that's why I've decided to close the doors on Retro Gaming Radio. So, despite what any other radio show out there may say that they caused me to go away, well, that's just not true. And the Retro Gaming Radio spirit will live on through the archives. We are going to be putting the archives up slowly but surely. You'll be able to get old episodes of Retro Gaming Radio in audio format, and the CD will still be available for those of you who would like to have the show in its full format. So it seems fitting that today on this show we are going to talk about probably the item in retro gaming history that's had the most interesting and illustrious history, that still has groups of die-hard fanatics behind it, whose future is still uncertain, been alive for 15, 16 years now and just won't go away. So the focus today is going to be on the Amiga computer. Emulation, the history, how you can be part of the Amiga community even though you have a PC. We're going to review a couple of products, the very, very wonderful Cloanto Amiga Forever package. In full review, we're also going to look at the Amiga Explorer package, which is exactly what so many of you people have written to me and said, you know, I really wish that I had something that would do this. Well, that's what the Amiga Explorer package does, and we're going to review that in detail as well. So, very exciting. There's a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about the Amiga, about its history, and I want to be able to bring that to life for those of you out there who missed it. And that's what I'd like to start with. It seems like a good spot to start, the beginning. It was 1982. A group of designers got together to brainstorm over designing the greatest computer ever made. Those designers were Jay Miner, who was an experienced designer for Atari on the 2600 system, Dave Morris from Tonka Toys, and R.J. Michael from Williams, the now legendary arcade firm. They managed to get funding from a trio of dentists in the amount of about $7 million and set up offices in Silicon Valley. They named themselves High Toro and put up the front of being joystick developers. This is what the investors wanted, of course, is to cash in on the video game craze of the early to mid-'80s. So secretive was this whole operation that the designers used code words when on the phone in case they were being tapped. They decided that the least suspicious aliases would be female names. This explains the three main custom chips, Paula, Agnes, and Denise, that are in the Amiga. This in turn led to the machine picking up the name of Lorraine and the company taking on the name Amiga, which is Spanish for girlfriend. The company produced all sorts of controllers, joysticks, for games. The manufacturing of these joysticks was a cover for the real target of the company. Besides the cover aspect, the company won also the respect of their customers, and this got the necessary money for the development of their dream machine. One of the first controllers High Toro produced was the Joy Board. You used it by sitting on it. There are many games written for the Joy Board, but the best game written for it was something called Zen Meditation. The purpose of this game was to stand absolutely still. The term guru meditation that you see on the Amiga when an error happens comes from this game. It used to be said that if anything went wrong during the development of the Amiga, this was the only way to relax, just to play this game. But there were problems in High Toro. The technical staff wanted a full Motorola 68000, a 16-bit processor, the best CPU in 1982, supercomputer, but the investors wanted just a game machine. Now, the technical staff did what the management wanted, but added some features which a game computer did not require to function. These hidden expansion possibilities included a keyboard, extra memory, and this is what actually saved the project in the end. As you know, the game market collapsed at the time when the designs were finally given shape to the Amiga. The technical staff got the right results. High Toro's game console was rebuilt into the real Motorola 68000 supercomputer. High Toro's game console got the name Amiga. The name was chosen because it would be alphabetically before Apple and Atari. That's something that even I didn't know about until I researched the story. Also, the name was positive because, of course, it means girlfriend in Spanish. High Toro was renamed to Amiga Incorporated. Since the code names of the custom processors were female, this also made sense. The code name for the first prototype was Lorraine. In the beginning of 1983, the ingredients for the machine were only on paper. The disk operating system had to be written, the memory configuration, and the interfaces for the connection of peripherals had yet to be determined. During 1983, the different parts of Lorraine were chosen. It was decided Lorraine would work with special custom chips to avoid slowing down the 68000 processor. The development of the Lorraine was difficult, especially the system software. At the end of the summer, the custom chips were slowly beginning to function. There were three types of custom chips: the Agnes, which was the address generator, Daphne, later named to Denise, which was the display adapter, and Paula, which is ports and audio. Amiga Incorporated decided to assemble a Lorraine prototype for a show only a few months away. The first public presentation of Lorraine took place at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show at the end of the year. The Winter Consumer Electronics Show of 1984 was very important for the survival of Amiga Incorporated. The original investment of about $7 million was not enough to continue development. The Amiga was officially still a classified project and was, because of this, only shown to a select group of people. This presentation, however, made a great impression on the public. The excellent picture and sound quality were unprecedented. The future of the company seemed to be saved. After the Consumer Electronics Show, it appeared that the future was not so rosy. They had extra money, but it was not enough. The debts piled up. The sales of joystick, which were the main income, stagnated through the collapsing video game market, and the future of the company was unsure until the summer Consumer Electronics Show. Bankruptcy, in fact, was just avoided. At the Summer Consumer Electronics Show, Amiga Incorporated were able to let the public see the real custom chips. The reaction was more favorable than the time before. Amiga Incorporated managed to put the graphic power of very great workstations into three tiny chips. Aside from that, the computer had more colors than the Apple Macintosh, which only had two. Because of the Summer Consumer Electronics Show, Amiga was able to develop the Amiga further. After a short time, however, though, Amiga Incorporated ran out of monies again. The financiers were not prepared to put more money into the project. Amiga Incorporated only survived by external funding of a few million from all sorts of companies, or they would have been taken over. The takeover actually was voted to be the best solution. Amiga Incorporated appealed to all kinds of companies. Sony, Apple, Silicon Graphics, Atari, HP. All possible moneylenders were contacted. Only Atari, however, was interested and offered Amiga Incorporated a loan of $500,000. With this loan, Amiga Incorporated survived long enough to negotiate. At that moment, Commodore came into the picture. Now, Commodore was prepared to take over the Amiga Incorporated for a reasonable price, so Commodore Amiga Incorporated was created. The takeover brought in about $27 million of extra development money. With this extra money, the company could go further with the development of the Amiga. The integration of a workable disk operating system in the Amiga concept, though, was a problem. It had to be a better and faster DOS than MS-DOS. The Commodore management, settled in Westchester, Philadelphia, was of the opinion that the introduction of DOS took too much time, so they called a company called Metacom Co. to convert their DOS Tripos for the Amiga. The employees of Amiga Incorporated thought the end result was not good. It was too slow and not reliable. The conversion of Metacom Co. DOS needed more time than expected. Any profit which might have been made through a quick release was lost. But finally, through hoops and ladders and everything else, Amiga DOS finally became a reality. July 1985, during a press conference in New York, Commodore Electronics introduced their new product, the Amiga computer. The Amiga they showed that day was the Amiga 1000. The Amiga 1000 was the first Amiga ever and started the Amiga saga. What was shown that day to the public, though, was a technical mess. The computer was way ahead of its time. The Amiga was multitasking, had unprecedented graphics and sound possibilities, and custom chips, built-in mouse control, fast 68,000 processor, etc. But there were some problems. At introduction, the Amiga 1000 had 256K of internal RAM. This was because of a reduction due to design and development costs of Commodore. The development team of Amiga wanted the 512K of RAM, but management got its 256K cut reduction. As a compromise, the Amiga 1000 got an expansion slot on the front for a card with the extra 256K. The Amiga 1000 had the kickstart with all the permanent routines of Intuition and Amiga DOS on a floppy. Another detail, the bottom plate of the Amiga 1000 has a paw print of the dog Mitchie and the signatures of all the team members. Now, this is what they called the Signature Edition Amiga 1000, and not all of them bear that information. In 1986, Commodore was busy with designing the Amiga 2000. The original designs were rejected by Commodore. They said they weren't good enough. So Commodore decides to work on a version which is being designed in West Germany. The results of this decision unfortunately laid many people off in the U.S. In a few months, none of the original crew remained. Then the saving grace appeared in 1987, the Amiga 500, tailored to the mass market. This then sparked the first of many vicious pricing wars between Atari and Commodore, and they trashed anything in their paths. Due to a huge interest in the excellent public domain scene developing software, the Amiga 500 started to sell very well. Games were originally ported from the ST, the Atari ST, to the Amiga, but this soon changed as the Amiga 500 established itself. Developers were writing on it, in some cases solely for it. The A500 sales were radically outstripping those of Atari ST, and this encouraged third-party manufacturers to produce add-ons such as RAM and disk drives. Now, Commodore's advertising was the problem with the Amiga 1000, even though the machine could sell itself. The small Amiga 500 had everything, despite the case, what the Amiga 1000 had. It was inexpensive. It had kickstart in ROM, no more using a boot floppy, standard memory of 512K, expandable, and improved system software. The motherboard was named after the pop song Rock Lobster from the B-52s, and a lot of the motherboards on the A500, if you actually pulled them out and looked at them, you would see Channel Z or Rock Lobster actually labeled on the board. The guys at Commodore at least had a sense of humor. In 1988, the Amiga sales passed 1 million units due to the immense popularity of the A500. Unfortunately, the 500's reputation as a stellar game machine kept professional software releases at a minimum, which started the downfall of the Amiga. 1989 made the Amiga the Definitives game machine. The Batman Pack, the most popular Amiga computer plus software package ever, is released. The Amiga 3000, the first 32-bit Amiga, complete with 68030 processors, released in 1990. With its professional hardware and design, it was targeted at professionals, but the software simply wasn't there. It also introduced incompatibilities with some older A500 software, And along with that, it had a $3,000 price tag, too. 2 million Amiga units, though, had shipped by 1991. The A500 Plus was released, the Amiga 600, and the dreaded CD-TV, an Amiga set-top box, overpriced, underpowered, but did have a CD-ROM and some decent software backing. The Amiga 600 was tiny, had an IDE hard drive capability, PCMCIA slot, and the ECS chipset. Right idea, but a bit too late. 1982 saw 4 million units shipped. The next generation Amiga 1200 finally ships with the AGA chipset, capable of even more graphics power. Using the mold of the successful A500, the A1200 was packed with a Batman-like bundle and sold tons of units. The promised CD-ROM add-on failure to ship probably was one of the final nails in the Amiga coffin. Late 1992 saw the professional AGA machine, the Amiga 4000, which was a decent machine despite its lack of foresight Commodore used when building it, going IDE instead of SCSI, limitations on chip RAM, etc. Things started to go sour in 1993. Commodore starts laying people off left and right. The AAA chipset for future Amigas is shelved due to lack of cash. They try to go back to the basics and revamp a new games machine, the CD-ROM-based CD32, being expandable to a full-blown computer. An A1200 game console, basically, it knocked the pants off every other CD-ROM-based console, including the Sega CD. The A2000 is officially retired, and a lower-cost Amiga 4000 is introduced. Amazingly enough, a record number of A1200s are sold this year, but it just wasn't enough. Commodore had already began beating to the tune of the wrong drum. In the beginning of 1994, they introduced the Amiga 4000 Tower, but on April 29, 1984, Commodore declares bankruptcy. Amiga sales the problem? No, remarkably, Amiga 1200 sales are still up, and even CD32 sales are going up at this point. Seems our executives at Commodore were paying themselves so much cash for a salary and not reinvesting their money that eventually it dried up. Couple this with the failure of the Commodore PC compatible, remember the Colt, launch, and well, nothing else could be done. Other Commodore divisions in other countries start closing down too. Now, this was a horrible time for the Amiga community. Everybody was rumored to be taking over the Amiga. Samsung, Newtek, Philips, Sony. It was truly ugly. But the truth was even uglier. Although in the bidding, Commodore UK division lost the auction, and Escom of Germany picked up the Amiga for about $5 million lock, stock, and barrel. Not even be able to save their own sorry company, they drove what was left of the Amiga into the ground. It was often speculated Escom only wanted the Amiga name and did not care about the Amiga computer. In 1996, Escom themselves filed for bankruptcy. About that time, the first PC-based Amiga emulator, UAE, was born and escalated into what is now a viable alternative to owning an actual Amiga. Starting on Linux, it's now been ported to almost every major computer. 1997 was an interesting year. Gateway Computers buys the Amiga, and of course does nothing with it. Cloanto buys the rights to use Amiga software technologies in a turnkey Amiga emulation package for the PC, which we're going to be reviewing later on in the show. Probably the best thing to come out of the latter years of the Amiga was the Cloanto emulation package. They're one of the few that are still around today. The last couple of years saw more turmoil, and the majority of the ever-faithful Amiga users have finally given up and moved on to the now dominant PC world. Even to date, the future of the Amiga is in turmoil. The Amiga now, unfortunately, the name is to be part of an internet connectivity language running on Linux. What a waste. So as you can see, the Amiga had an interesting history, sort of a sad history. If the two executives at Commodore hadn't been paying themselves $14 million a year in salary, maybe the Amiga would have lived. It's really easy to blame Commodore's advertising because most of us know what it was like. We had Amigas, we never saw an ad for it. Never saw it on television, and the magazine ads looked horrible. They were cartoony. No one was taking them seriously. But in reality, in the end, what it all boiled down to was two greedy little bastards up at Commodore that was pocketing all the cash. Go figure. Anyway, that's pretty much the Amiga history in a nutshell. Now, obviously, I didn't include everything. You could probably write a book on that one. But hopefully you've got a good idea as to how the Amiga lived its life, and even after its official death, it still lives on through emulation. Aside from console type emulation like the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, probably nothing is more faster growing and more exciting to people these days than Amiga emulation. And why not? Amiga was probably one of the best game computers ever made, if not the best, and features a wealth of software. Thousands and thousands of games lay out there in archives on websites ready to be downloaded and played. It gives something for the next generation to look at and play. And let's face it, some of the games on the Amiga, those of you who are die-hard Amiga people, you know what I'm talking about. Some of these games have never been properly duplicated back on the PC. So, there's definitely space for emulation. But what about getting into emulation? As most people know who've been around the emulation scene for a while, you know that emulation often ends in litigation, because emulation usually requires that you have some component of the original computer or video game, a ROM image of some sort that makes the emulator work. Now, are emulators illegal? No. It is perfectly legal for you to use an emulator. However, the ROM images or the kickstart on the Amiga or the PlayStation BIOS that you may need to run on, say, PSMU Pro, these are all copywritten. You are not allowed to use it unless you own one sort of situations. Now, there are some emulators that don't have this problem, like Bleem. Bleem basically reverse engineered the PlayStation BIOS, and they've been taken to court about 100 times by now over the issue, and they've managed to win. So emulation's proved to be legal. Now, how can you get into Amiga emulation and keep yourself out of jail? Well, let's start off by saying that Amiga emulation itself, there's a lot of legal ways to do it. Namely, the games that are out there, there's a good selection of games out there that are 100% legal. There are many, many companies that have said, yes, we're never going to make another dime on these. Will you please distribute them and get them to the people? You have perfectly legal rights to give them to anybody you want and play them. So that's a great thing. And more companies are coming around that way, which is something that I've talked over and over again on this show about. And I'm a big fan of companies doing that. And several companies have given me permission as well to use their games on my site, Amiga Emulation Zone. Now, what's important to know, though, is the bare essence of emulation. The Amiga Kickstart ROM is copyrighted. Now, how do you get around using this copyrighted piece of software, which is really what it is? It's a piece of software. How do you get around using that? Well, you can't. Either you're going to have to legally purchase something that gives you the Kickstart ROM, and I'm going to tell you all about that in a minute, or you can transfer your own Amiga, if you happen to still have one sitting in the closet. You can transfer the ROM image out of that Amiga onto your computer. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. Those are the legal ways to do it. Now, can you get on the web and find a copy of Kickstart 1.3? Yes. Should you use it? No. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, well, if the Amiga's dead, then who cares if I use it? Well, Cloanto, www.cloanto.com, purchased the rights to distribute Kickstart, which is the main BIOS of the Amiga, if you will, and the Workbench, which is the operating system of the Amiga. They purchased the rights to sell this product. Now, unlike Amiga, which Amiga Incorporated or Commodore, who are dead and buried, Cloanto is still very much alive. And they're out there ready to provide you with not only the ROM images, which alone should be, good enough to have you go over and pick them up, but they're also going to offer you, for a nominal, very low price, a full-blown, turnkey, even an idiot can use it, Amiga emulation package. Now, a lot of you out there who are listening to the show have probably tried Amiga emulation in the past. Very confusing. Chip RAM, Fast RAM, Kickstart 1.3, Kickstart 3.1, 68020, 680 EC20, blah, 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 Blitter, it's confusing. And I'll admit to you, the Amiga's a complicated machine. It was very difficult to emulate. And anytime you get anything complex, you got buttons, switches, and knobs everywhere to make it work. That's what Amiga emulation's like. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. The Amiga Forever package from Cloanto comes in two flavors. You can either buy it and download it online right then and there, which is really cool. You don't have to wait around. Or you can buy a CD-ROM edition, which has a bunch of extras and cross-platform versions for Linux or Mac or whatever it is you happen to be into. The online version is about 7 megs. You download it, you install it, and then you get a nice little menu that comes up. How do you want to start your Amiga? Do you want to start a bare-bones Amiga with no sound, which is what really eats your processor time up? Or do you want to start an Amiga with full-blown sound, all that other good support? They give you a choice of Workbench 1.3 or Kickstart 1.3, which is very compatible with a lot of games. Or they give you the new Kickstart 3.1, which is the one that's all the modern Amigas are running on, that have the AG8 chipset and have all the goodies built into it. So if you're running to run applications, you've got the 3.1. If you're wanting to run games, you got the 1.3. It's a pretty good deal. All menu driven. You'll click 2 clicks, and you are sitting in front of an Amiga desktop they call Workbench. And you're ready to play. They have a bunch of software installed for you, including some their own personal paint package, which Cloanto originally became popular for. Very nice paint package. Comes with a whole bunch of extra utilities that help you along. File managers, shell enhancers for doing your DOS prompt type stuff, right, for you PC guys. They've got all this stuff built in. They've licensed it, and they've packaged it, and it's brain dead easy to use. So what you do is you go into 1.3 mode, right? Then it comes up and says stick in a Kickstart disk. You push 2 buttons. A requester comes up. You select that game image. You went up to the internet and downloaded. You click OK. It boots up, and you're playing on the Amiga. I mean, that's it. That's all there is to it. There's nothing to set. It'll work with the settings that they've picked are very compatible. $29.95 will buy you the Amiga Forever package. It's a good deal, considering they package up the latest version of WinUAE, which is the Windows emulator. I'm going from a Windows slant perspective, folks. This actually applies to Linux and Mac as well. But I'm going to stick with the Windows-centric, since that's what my log reports show as my standard audience. Go figure. Anyway, so they give this all to you in a menu, and you're good to go. They give you lots of text files, too, by the way. They give you lots of help for changing configurations. The questions that you're most likely to ask are probably already answered. Very, very simple, like I said before. Can't say that enough. Simple, 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 simple. And that's what people who run Amiga emulators want. They want simple. Fortunately, Amiga emulation is not always that easy. Now, you get, with the Amiga package, you get the Kickstarts, you get the Workbench, you get pre-made hard drive files ready to boot off of. You're actually booting to a pseudo Amiga hard drive. It's great. It's like owning a full-blown Amiga 3000 with a hard drive and all the RAM that you could want and the best video card or the best video subsystem right there on your PC. And it took you nothing to do it. And it was downloadable. It's not like you buy and have to wait. You buy and download, and you're running Amiga by the end of the day. Life's good. Very, very polished. Very good product. If you haven't had a chance to look at it or see it in operation, I highly recommend you find somebody who's purchased it and go over to their place and take a look. If you've wanted to get into Amiga emulation, or maybe you're an Amiga user that's got an Amiga 500 tricked out with a hard drive and whatnot, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I got a better Amiga inside my PC than I do sitting next to me on the desk. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you can migrate that information from your old Amiga to your new PC Amiga, for lack of a better term. Coming with the Amiga Forever package and available standalone for $19.95 is the Amiga Explorer package. Now, I'll tell you what, folks, this is something nothing short of unbelievable. Now, I read about it, and I gotta admit, I didn't believe that it would be as simple as they made it out to be. But in reality, it truly, truly is. What the Amiga Explorer package allows you to do, now I don't know about you, I'm an Amiga owner, I still have an Amiga CD32 tricked out to a full A1200 with all the trimmings, extra RAM, hard drive, floppy disk, mouse, keyboard, I got the whole kit and caboodle. And it's sitting there. I got a hard drive full of goodies, hard drive games, stuff I've done on my own for Dark Unicorn production, it's all sitting there right on this hard drive. Right next to it I got a PC. The Amiga Explorer will allow you to take a no modem cable, like $10 at your local Radio Shack, no modem cable, plug it into your Amiga, okay? Then plug it into your PC, the other end, of course. Run the software on both machines, the client software. Next thing you know, you've got a window open on your PC desktop showing you all the drives on your Amiga. That's right. Hard drive, floppy drive, and this is the neat part. It exposes your Kickstart image in your motherboard, the actual guts of the Amiga. It exposes that like it was a file. Yeah, check this out. Just like you open up a window, your C drive, you open up an Amiga drive right on your screen, right then and there. It goes through the serial cable, the no modem serial cable, and you can then drag and drop files back and forth, just as if you were networked to another computer, another PC. Drag and drop. If you want to copy that Kickstart ROM over to use inside of WinUAE legally, all you do is drag kick.rom onto your desktop, and it copies it right over there. You're ready to play. You're ready to use WinUAE. A lot of people have written to me and said, hey, I've got disks of software for my Amiga 500 sitting in the closet gathering dust. I've got an old Amiga 500 here. There's no hard drive. There's no extra RAM. It's just bare bone. But I'd like to be able to move my games from my Amiga 500 days over to the PC so I can use them. Good news. All you need to do is be able to boot off of an Amiga floppy disk with the software installed on it, and you will have a link to your PC. Copy the Kickstart ROM over. Stick a disk in DF0 for you Amiga people. It shows up as an ADF file on the PC. You just copy it over and drop it. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. It's a serial cable. How fast can it be? Well, I'm not going to lie to you. It's not that fast. Now, it defaults to using 19.2 for a connection speed between the two computers. Now, those of you that know what that number means knows that that's not a very impressive number, especially not when you're moving huge gigabytes of, well, at least megabytes of files over. I can tell you now through my own testing, I actually tweaked my connection speed higher. You can actually go in and say, I don't want 19.2, I want 57.6 connection. Now, that's a considerable speed increase over 19.2, but the quality of your serial cable, the length of your serial cable, your PC speed, your Amiga, all of these things are going to be effective of how fast you can tweak the Amiga and the PC speed up to transfer across that cable. Now, I was able to go to 57.6 with no problem. At 57.6, I could transfer an entire Kickstart image, the Kickstart ROM, off the Amiga to the PC in about 3.5 minutes. I know you're thinking, wow, that's a long time. But it's not bad considering you just saved yourself $30. You don't have to buy it now. You've had it in your Amiga, now you got it on your PC. What's 3 minutes cost you? Okay, what about the important part, transferring a disk image over? Well, I was able to transfer a disk image over in about just under 2 minutes. That's not too shabby. An ADF file just transferred right over in about 2 minutes. Now, if you're going to go on a ripping crusade and start ripping those 500 disks you got in the closet, well, you better allocate the weekend. But if what you want to do is occasionally transfer that disk across, if you occasionally want to share data, now this is an interesting point. You could actually take, this is the other thing, Amiga Explorer exposes your hard drive as a WinUAE compatible HDF, which is a hard disk format. Now follow me on this one. You've got a tricked out Amiga 500, hard drive loaded to the gills with everything you ever used on the Amiga. Your favorite utilities, your favorite terminal software, your favorite games. And you liked it. I mean, you spent hours and days customizing this hard drive. You can take and copy, now obviously it's not going to be that quick, but you can drag that HDF over to your PC, mount it under UAE as a hard drive image, and boot it up just like you were running your old Amiga. Now that's pretty cool. Now for $19.95, that's a bargain. If you've ever tried to do any sort of hard drive setup or configuration inside of UAE itself, you'll not be pleased. Knowing that a product like this exists and it's that simple to use. Now I'll tell you what, folks, the hardest part for me was coming up with a cable that had the right ends on it. Okay? That was the hardest part. All I did, now this is assuming, now imagine you had an Amiga 1200 with a hard drive. That's kind of what I'm using. I'm using a CD32 tricked out. I plugged the two cables in. Okay? On the PC, I formatted a low-density disk, because that's what my CD32 would take, and I dropped the Amiga Explorer software onto that disk, on a PC-formatted disk. Now, on my Amiga 1200, I have a utility built into the operating system called PC0, which basically mounts the Amiga disk as a PC drive. So you can just stick that disk right in the drive. And they explain this all in the instructions, folks. I just didn't pull this out of my tail end. This is all in the instructions. They're going to tell you how to do this. I put the PC disk in my Amiga. I copied the very, very small client software off onto my hard drive, and I ran it. It comes up with a little window, says what it specs it's running, and then it just goes in the background. Your Amiga's just sitting there like it always does. Then I went to the PC side and installed that software. Very painless. It puts an icon on your desktop. You right-click it, and it comes up with some properties. You know, you set your bit rate and all this other stuff. You can use the defaults or try to tweak your speed up like I did. Boom. Window opens up. You're connected to the Amiga. It's that easy. Heck, you don't even have to be able to see your Amiga. You boot your Amiga up and make sure the software's running, then turn the monitor off. Let it just sit there as a slave. Now you've got all of those drives, all of that stuff on the Amiga accessible and exposed to your PC. It's like being let out of prison. There's no easier way to, you got a CD-ROM drive? It's visible. If you want to put in the Assassin game disc collection on your Amiga with a CD-ROM drive and you want to copy that stuff over to your PC? Nothing. It's just drag and drop, just like any other PC operation. That's how simple Amiga Explorer is. You can purchase it, $19.95 standalone, download it today, of course, after your credit card clears, naturally. Download it and be using it today. Cloanto has gone through every step of the way. They've been doing this for a long time. They have refined everything down to a process. And this Amiga Explorer package is what everybody has been waiting for. And I guarantee you it's not going to get enough press, because a lot of people think, oh, well, what do I need that for? I could use PC to Amiga, or I could use Transdisk, or I could use any other number of different freebie applications that you can download off AmiNet to make this transfer. People, those utilities are not going to expose the Kickstart ROM for you. They're not going to let you drag and drop a copy of your Amiga hard drive into a compatible HDF format. These people are geniuses for coming up with something that can do this simply and this easily. It's truly Amiga emulation for the common man. And I'll tell you what, if I were a beginner in Amiga emulation, I don't see how I could live without this product. The Amiga Forever package, which comes with that included, is a great solution for people who want to dabble but don't want to become Amiga experts. You want to play Shadow of the Beast again because you used to spend hours playing Shadow of the Beast over at your friend's house on Saturdays. Or you want to play Defender of the Crown because you had an old 286 and your buddy was playing Defender of the Crown with all those colors and all that sound and the jousting and the horns blowing. Your friend had it, you didn't. Now you get to relive it and play Defender of the Crown on your PC the way you saw it as a child, as a kid, or however old you were at the time. It's a very exciting situation to be able to get into Amiga emulation. Now, on with that, I'd like to take a moment to plug, of course, my own Amiga emulation site. I call it the Amiga Emulation Zone. You can reach it at www.amigaemulation.com. It has currently over 180 games online. It has configurations for those very unusual games that works under UAE. You'll find those there. You'll also find Amiga CD covers. Those are very hard to find. If you bought some used software off the net or off eBay and it didn't come with a jacket, it's the original CD, but heck, you didn't get a jacket for it, you didn't get a cover insert for your jewel case, I may have it online. You can come and download it and print it out and stick it in your own jewel case. It's not as good as having the original, but at least it's there. Maybe you're looking to expand your CD32 game collection, and you just want to see what the game graphics look like. Well, I may have the back cover online. You can go take a look at the game graphics. Very exciting. We also have links to other great Amiga sites on the web that you can go and get even more software and even more help in your Amiga emulation experience. Amiga emulation is very fun to be into right now. It's very exciting. There's a lot of people getting into it. The news groups for Amiga gaming and emulation have just been growing exponentially over the last year. And it's just like, it's the same as what arcade emulation was about 2-3 years ago. It's an exciting new field. And the UAE team and the other people writing emulators, like the Fellow Project, they're still around. They're trying to make the Amiga emulation as perfect and as fast as possible. Now, what do you need for Amiga emulation? Speaking of hardware, now there's a lot of games. Now, I know the Amiga 500 was a 7 megahertz computer, but as you knew from the history that we talked about, the Amiga had a lot of support chips which took the load off the processor. Emulating a 7 megahertz Amiga is not nearly as easy as it may seem. There's a lot of custom routines and custom chips that have to be emulated. So if you've got, me personally, when I had a P233, it was okay. I had to use frame skip, and there was a lot of games that would just suck too much processor time down. It'd kind of stutter. I couldn't use sound a lot. But with this P2450 I have, which is actually these days low-end technology, with a P2450 I can run almost every game on the Amiga, sweet as silk, no frame skip, emulated sound, the whole bit. So if you got a P2450, you're definitely in the ball game. If you've got any class of Pentium 2, when I had a Celeron 300A, not overclocked, but a 300A, it performed very well. So the results are going to vary from computer to computer. And the results of using Amiga Explorer between different types of PCs and Amigas are obviously going to give you different results. And I'm afraid I just can't benchmark every possible system out there. I can just tell you what I use, and you can kind of gauge it to what you use. In any event, Amiga emulation is just like it was for arcade emulation a couple of years ago. It's very new. It's very exciting. They haven't quite got all the bugs worked out yet. There's still a couple games that don't work, so you're waiting every release for WinUA to play Amiga one-on-one again, or for AGA support to get good enough to where you can play Roadkill with proper collision detection. It's not in its infancy where it's no fun, but it's not to the point to where it's old hat. So if you're looking for a new emulation scene to get into that gives you kind of that same rush, Amiga emulation just might be where it's at. So that kind of wraps up my review of Amiga Forever from Cloanto and the Amiga Explorer package also from Cloanto. In these last few minutes of the show, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody on the Monroe World mailing list, the folks who visit AEZ religiously every day and are clicking those all-important ad banners for me. I only have one banner per page, and it's very non-discreet. It doesn't even pay for the bandwidth, but it helps offset. For those of you who've been contributing to the scene this whole time, the emulation authors, the MAME team, the RetroCade team, the site ops who hour after hour provide you with ROM services. For all of these people out there that have been part of this retro gaming community and have supported Monroe World and Insert Coin way back when and promoted my news and hosted my show. Thank you for being there and making the retro gaming experience as exciting as it has been and as fun as it has been. Will Retro Gaming Radio ever come back? I don't think so. Originally, I told a lot of the site ops that I might be back around Christmas, but things are busy. You know, I've got a family, I've got obligations of my own to attend to, and while Retro Gaming Radio has been fun, I think its time is over, and I think it's time for someone else maybe to pick up and start talking about PlayStation emulation, you know, and talking about what it was like to first run Mario World 64 on Ultra HLE for the first time. You know, I think that's what more of the majority is looking for. Now I could turn this into an Amiga show and talk about Amiga because that's what I'm doing these days. I'm running an Amiga site. I'm rewriting Amiga games for the PC. But that's not what a lot of Retro Gaming Radio listeners tuned in for, you know. So instead of doing a disservice to all of you who are still listening to the show, I would rather just let it drift away. You know, we've almost had 2 full years of shows, and we'll put them all on for you guys to listen to so you can hear the reviews and listen to the rants at the IDSA and all those other things that were the golden times of Retro Gaming Radio. Instead of trying to stumble around trying to find something to talk about with MAME or talk about the Namco Museum Pack 27 for the PlayStation, I think it's time for Retro Gaming Radio to just fall into the history of everything else with retro gaming. And I'll miss doing the show from time to time, but I think with my attention centered on other things, I think there'll be more exciting things to come. We have a good team put together for Dark Unicorn Productions, my old shareware team on the Amiga. We have a new website, darkunicornproductions.com. We're working close with the Div Game Studio people. Excellent programming language for those of you who've always wanted to write a game but never felt you could learn how to program, or C looks too daunting, Visual Basic's not powerful enough, Dark Basics too 3D centric. Give Div a try. Div-arena.com is their website, so you can download demos of that software. Anyway, Dark Unicorn Productions, which is darkunicornproductions.com, if I didn't mention it already, we're looking at translating classic games to the PC. Now, a lot of people play emulated versions, and that's fine. But there's always a market for those people who will never touch emulators, that have never ever gotten to play River Raid, who've never gotten to play Psycho Squares on the Amiga. You know, there are people who won't use emulators. Well, you know, River Raid's an old junky 64 game, but what if it was brought forward to the 21st century? What if River Raid was redone with all the fun, but with enhanced graphics and new options, sort of like what Hasbro's doing? They seem to be doing it right. Well, Dark Unicorn Productions is also trying to take that route. We're porting a lot of our own stuff from the old DUP Amiga days. We're porting that to the PC. And there's a lot of games from the illustrious history of computers, like Orc Attack on the Amiga, or Dino Eggs on the C64, or River Raid on the C64 and the Atari 2600. These are all games that have screamed for years to be ported. And we're going to hopefully manage to do that. One of the other guys may be working on a Berserk remake for the year 2000. It's very exciting, and there just isn't enough time to go around. A lot of the pages hosted on Monroe World will probably start vanishing. I simply don't have the time or the bandwidth to keep up with them. And instead of letting them sit there and be a year old with no updates and broken links, it's time for them to just kind of go away too. You know, you can bet the Amiga Emulation Zone page will be around for a good long time. As long as there's interest in Amiga emulation, it'll probably be there. The Retro Gaming Radio site, of course, will stay up for archives. And who knows, maybe something different will come along. Who knows? I've got a whole Dark Unicorn site to tidy up. Right now we've got sort of a placeholder site, but it gets us by while we're coding. I'm writing a manual, a beginner's manual for Div. For those of you who think you can't write a game, I've got a manual that says you can. And you'll be writing a scroller shoot 'em up game, and you'll do it in the course of a couple of hours, and you'll look and go, wow, I can't believe game programming was that easy. Well, with Div it is. And this manual, Div actually has contracted me out to create for them. We'll have source code and line-by-line instructions explaining to you standard programming concepts. I want people to be able to use Div to recreate the games of their childhood. And that's what the Div team wants. You know, they want you to take Bruce Lee on the C64 and port it to the PC. They want you to take IK Plus, that great wacky Amiga karate game and C64 karate game, and they want you to port that to the PC. Relive your childhood through your own creations. That's all I can really say about that. But take a look. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Well, folks, I've prattled on long enough for the show. Thanks again for joining us on this final episode of Retro Gaming Radio. Thanks again for all my supporters. You guys have been the best. I can't imagine having a better audience than you guys. Until whenever, this is Shane R. Monroe saying, keep it retro.